something happening in our local community and ways to help us both stay connected to the wider community in which we live, to stay connected or to learn about programs or things happening that we have not been aware of. This morning is one of those programs. I'm especially delighted when the persons I get to introduce, they're part of our congregation. Dorothy Yoder-Nice, part of Assembly? 8th Street? Okay. And Sally Jo Milne and Bonnie King, whom we see most days. And Judith Davis intended to be part of this group, but developed COVID in the past week. So we don't know if she's going to join us by Zoom. She has the link, but didn't respond to that. Another idea that comes to the curriculum committee from time to time is to pick up on various articles that are in Anabaptist World. And it so happened a couple weeks ago, maybe late summer, in an article about these three, but four, counting Judith Davis, was written about a group that they foster and nurture that takes place at Goshen Public Library. And so they were invited to talk to us about that this morning, what they're doing. And it's always an apt topic given the country we live in, but especially so at this time. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing you.
We're going to be seated at this now. Thanks for inviting us. We like to talk about what we do. But I'm going to give it to Dorothy, who is sort of the instigator of this whole thing, and let her continue.
Thanks to all of you for inviting us, yes. And I'm really sorry Judith isn't here. Judith is a key segment because of the breadth that she brings. And Sally Jo will tell a little bit more about her reason for wanting to do this. And I would say we will all talk a little bit about why we ourselves are interested in interfaith. And I'll start that. I believe, and I will be saying a number of things that I believe. And you don't have to believe the same thing, but I invite you to consider at least thinking about some of these things. I think there's one God, a universal God, and with multiple names, multiple forms, but one God. I believe that Jesus is the historic channel through which I've learned the most about God. But I don't think Jesus is the only channel to God. Scripture is very supportive of the idea of knowing about different religions. Jesus was amazing in his contacts with diverse people and his claim to their claims. And I guess part of scripture has helped me to see that people believe differently, but especially the people I have known I especially knew back in India between 62 and 65 when we lived there. And we've returned multiple times. But these people are believers in the religion to which they are most loyal. I consider myself a believer. And I look to others also for truth. I don't have it all. Christians don't have it all, but there's truth for us to also learn from others. And I think the main reason that we're meeting as a group is because we simply want to know more about different religions. So exposure is good. Difference is good. I think the whole idea of difference is very basic to God's intent, rather than sameness. We learn through observing difference and hearing others say why something is important to them. I'm a teacher. I can't avoid that. I like to pass on what I've learned. And one thing is I read. So I just brought a handful of the books along. There's so much to be read. Some writers I've really welcomed. Diana Eck at Harvard. She's done an amazing task with interfaith issues in this country. Paul Netter. I also have written a little bit. Multiple Musing, Essays and Exchanges, Mennonites Encounter Hinduism, a couple years of research, especially of people who are Mennonites of GCMCMB. Okay, I'm an ecumenical kind of person. I am Mennonite, and I probably always will be, but I really have to have other denominations as well as other religions and people who are loyal to these to help me be.
The question, why am I interested in interfaith inquiry? Well, thinking back, I think it all began when I moved from insular Amish Mennonite Shipshewana to Goshen. Goshen was very diversified. I have now learned there's more diversity. The close interactions that we had with Scottish Presbyterian and British Anglicans in East Africa and England, the introduction to Islam in West Africa and Indonesia, more intense interaction with Islam in Bangladesh, where 90 to 95% of our MCC staff was Muslim. But the staff also included Buddhists, Christian, Hindus. And then in Laos, where the MCC staff was maybe 98, 99% Buddhist. And then we had a 3-week, very informative trip to India. This was not on our bucket list at all, but we were in Bangladesh and went to India. And there we met with Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, and learned a lot. We had a fascinating week in Tibet with a different kind of Buddhist. So, I mean, I've had a lot of exposure, but no in-depth. And so I'm trying to learn more of the teachings and what it all involves. I'll come back to Judith.
I hope there's time for you to come back to Judith.
Well, maybe we just wanted to say something about Judith adds another dimension. She was Catholic, but became an assistant to the, the assistant to the dean in the graduate university at the Jewish Institution in New York City. She's worked many years at Goshen College, knows the Mennonites very well, and is now attending Assembly. So she brings a very diverse outlook.
And that's pretty much who we are. And I went back to the very beginning too. And so George is supposed to cut me off, but I don't have I can see art. I do. My story begins here on the banks of the Elkhart River too. I was born in Goshen. And so today I want to acknowledge the one in whom we live and move and have our being with gratitude and lament for who my ancestors were, the land we lived on, and what it means to me today. And I've learned so much in recent years about that heritage. I've gone down many paths in recent weeks as I thought about what I can say here, and now I've got the mic. I was born here. My father was in CPS. So mother and I spent a lot of time in my maternal grandparents' home out on Fish Lake Road. We had the occasional visit to New Jersey where we bunked with George Schmucker's parents. I have connections all through here. We lived on Fish Lake Road. And, like your grandkids or other people's grandkids, I think I absorbed everything I heard. Whether Grandpa was going to Honeyville to the mill, or if he was looking up Driver, there was this guy Driver he was always talking to, and I still haven't figured out who it is, but he had to do with the Congo Inland Mission. And my grandfather Yoder was very interested in the Congo Inland Mission. I heard about it often. And so when my brother got to be old enough to get in my stuff, maybe I was 5 years old, he would have been 2 then, I told my mom I was going to grow up and be a missionary in Africa so I could get away from him and his troublemaking. When I was 3 years old, he was out of CPS, and we moved to the Lichty family farm near Smithville, Ohio, right down the road from Julia Rohr and her family. Julia Rohr is now Julia Byler. And in both of my childhood churches, I recall a strong interest in global Christianity, the global Mennonite community. And in that church in Smithville, I grew up to be old enough to sing the Messiah with Bill and Phil Miller. It was always that the church has been in my life always, and wherever we've gone, there's been the church. Then I came to Goshen College. During those years there, I met Stan, my husband Stan, a missionary kid. And that appealed to me because maybe I'd get to go to Africa. Who knows? And also, so I was marrying him the summer after we graduated. As a graduation gift, my major professor gave me the book. I think he had some insight into what might lead ahead. Eugene Nida's book, Customs and Cultures. And that book traveled with me for many years in many places. And I'm so grateful for that. And when we got married in this place, that year after I graduated from college, my Uncle Harry also tuned into that. And I remember his meditation, I can't quote him, referring to or wondering about where we as a couple might land up or what we might do. And I think he thought there might be some international living involved. So when Stan was ready for his first interviews for work, he interviewed for a job with USDA on a USAID project in Nigeria. And Mom and Dad didn't say, "Oh, but you have supper with us every Friday night." I never heard a negative take on our decision to go to Nigeria, where we lived for 7 years. And there I met my first Islam person. He was Muslim person. He was my English teacher. Used to ride the miles out from the old city of Zaria to teach me Hausa. And here he is on an Eid day, dressed up for a Salah, as it's called. And he was Islam. We went to the church on campus, which was an interdenominational church. There was a Southern Baptist little church in town. We felt more, the university folk, we were more comfortable with that, with Sands work. Colleagues went there. And there was always a unity and diversity there too. And when sometime in that time, we met the young Jeremy Hines, an Anglican fellow who had come to and he was powerfully, and I can't quote him either, but he was in Nigeria to relate to Muslims, for Christians to learn to relate to Muslims. The sights and sounds for me were there. I saw mosques. Zaria was a walled city. Heard my first call to prayer. Heard the drumming in the villages at night. And learned how much I learned a lot, but I didn't know very much about these peoples at all. And then I'm getting to India now. We went to India. Then after Nigeria, we were in Mississippi, learned a lot there about people who gave their lives to the cause of integration there. Then to India, where we went to Hyderabad, a city that's traditionally Muslim, but also has a lot of Hindus. The language is Telugu. Hindi is language too there. And there again, we found church people were helping me understand and build communities. Dave Lindell was a Lutheran missionary, but he was working for Max Muller-Bavon, where Dorothy has spent some time, all on Christian Muslim understanding and building bridges. And there again, more sights and sounds, more mosques, more calls to prayer. And then along with the calls of the prayer, you'd have the ringing of the bells and the calls, the songs, the Hindi songs from the temples. And we had temples all over. You know, homes had their little prayer rooms with their in-house God set up for prayers. Then we'd have little roadside temples. And then the big, grand Birla built marble temple in town. So much to see and do and visit. So I'm grateful for all these. I thank you for your time. It's just always been, the church has been there. I've been able to relate with people who can help answer my questions. In India, I came back and talked to Dorothy, I think probably after our first years or so in India. And what am I going to read? What about him? And she referred me to Diana Eck. And I think the one thing I remember about Hinduism is the emphasis on light. And all our faiths, these ones of the book, the Islam and the Jewish people, have traditions that are similar where we can connect. So it's been a good life. Thanks for listening to me and sharing with me.
You understand why we're interested? And I think we tend to want to share what we value, right? And what has taught us. We tend to think that it would probably be useful to others. Now what I'm going to do a little bit is explain a little history as to why this particular group here in Goshen started. And that's my fault. That's my credit. I myself have my seminary degree and went to India with a sense of I wish I knew so much more about Hinduism. I mean, if I would go there now compared to 1962, I would just understand people. And that's really pretty significant whenever you're relating with people, other religions, so that they could say, yes, how you've described their religion is true, or maybe not. And if not, they will correct you to better understand it. Anyway, SCOOP, SCUPE, was a seminary program that some students took it. They basically went to Chicago for a semester and did urban life work. That was SCOOP. SCOOP became an organization called Omnia, OMNIA. And it is now currently an organization that has work in 9 different countries, including the US, primarily working at interfaith and peacemaking. That group has trained 8,000 people. These 400 interfaith peacemaking teams, and most teams have about 20 people in each group. Some of the countries that they've been the longest are Bangladesh and Nigeria and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Uganda, and then there are some other Togo and a few others since then. Anyway, Shanta Trainer Wardana is the current leader of this group, and he had at one point been the interfaith leader at World Council of Churches, and later on he was one of the leaders at National Christian Council here in the US, in New York. So he is now the head of this organization and has been helping to train many of these people. I took the training by Zoom for 6 weeks or so. And then as a result of that, the idea is that you get involved. And I knew I wasn't going to go to any of these countries, but I thought of Goshen, and I thought, why not find out if there's interest? And I was intentional in selecting that this be for women. If we would simply designate, we want to learn about other religions. And so that's why this group started. I could say more about Omnia, but I'm sure Shanta would tell me he wishes I would encourage anybody to contribute some money to their cause. Obviously, they're hoping to get quite a few more people trained, but the idea is very Mennonite oriented. But part of this organization that appeals to me is that I'm on the board there, but I'm not with any other Mennonites. I'm with other people of diverse denominations. Okay, that's enough background.
Okay, I'll just very briefly give you some ideas of some of our meetings that we've had so far. I forget, when did we start?
2 years ago in May.
Okay, 2 years ago in May. 2.5 by now. We have had both guests and people with knowledge, the in-group, give presentations. They've been in person, and we've had several Zoom calls because one was in Germany and the other one was in Wisconsin. We had a Muslim woman come and talk. We had a Jewish woman rabbi. We had a Jewish professor who teaches at a Christian college. And then we had some in-group presentations on Jewish mysticism and bridging the Jewish Christianity divide, I guess. We had a Goshen College prof on Islam, Brianna, who has spent some time in the Middle East. We had a Hindu woman come and talk. Paul Knitter joined us and presented by Zoom one time. He's an interfaith scholar. Dorothy can tell you lots about him. There's a interfaith group in South Bend, and we had them come and tell us, more in depth of what they are doing and trying to learn. We had a Notre Dame prof talking about religious dialogue. We had a former Mennonite who introduced us to Mennonite culture with Buddhism, the interplay. And then last month we had Luke Gottschall talking to us about Native American religion. And we're going to continue that discussion in our next presentation on November 21. If you want to come to the public library on various aspects of Native Americans.
I was thinking about it. I can tell you a little more about our group, but not very much. It's when we decided where and when to meet, we intentionally thought about a place where everybody can be welcome, whether they are whatever religious background and faith tradition. And we came up with having a meeting in the public library. It seemed a good place, and they welcomed us to have a meeting there. And so that's where we've been meeting. And then how do you announce it to people and introduce it? The newspapers, there's social media, there's the newspapers, which not everybody reads. And so it's been kind of a hit and miss kind of thing to attract people. And we find you can.
It's listed in the Good of Goshen. If anyone gets that email, I try to make an announcement just before our meeting.
Okay. We have more about that. Our group, it's interesting. The population of Goshen, as diverse as we wish it to be, there have been maybe 20, 25 people coming, and 95% we are Anabaptist senior citizens. I don't, but then, I've led my life, and it's been where I've lived in these places that I couldn't help but come across people who thought differently and had different customs and different foods and different traditions than I have. So how do we I don't know why would anybody else be interested in other faiths anyway? It makes sense to me that folks would not have much curiosity. When I met Marion Smith a year ago, she's active in an interfaith group. Some of you know John's sister, Marion, in California. And they came together. They're very active right now. But what brought them together was the Muslim community in their area wanted to build a mosque. And there was a popular move afoot to not permit that to happen. And the Muslims came to a couple, Marion was among them, I don't know, Christian women, and asked for some help. And out of this grew this interfaith community. And the leadership now is not necessarily from the Christians, it's from the Muslims, it's from everyone, and it's a very mixed group. They eat together, they have their programs together, and I can imagine how this could happen in California. And in California, in Fresno, at a university there's an interfaith group that meets. So here in Goshen, we live in our situation, and I'm thinking, I don't know. This is where our meeting last time with Luke and learning about our indigenous people and their religion, that's right here in our place. And we continue to have Potawatomi and Miami people living and acting and meeting here. I don't know. We haven't been an activist group, and I don't know if that's what we're inclined to be. But something makes me wonder if maybe our place of finding meaning and connection with the broader community may not have something to do with our history and the historical residents here.
I'll just add one little thing. We are mainly a women's discussion group. Now, we haven't stopped men at the door, but at this point, we felt that men have their discussion groups. Women don't often. So at this point, it really is a women's discussion group.
I'd like to say a little bit more about the whole idea of relating with people who are of varied religions. I think maybe most of you have had experience. I think it's quite important for us to realize that the relationships that we form continue. And many of or I should say at least some of the key Hindu people who I knew in India were concerned, and they directly said to me they've experienced many Christians as either ignorant or arrogant. And I had to deal with that. I mean, I had to process that within myself. If we are seen as arrogant because we think Christianity is the only vital religion, we are seen as ignorant because we say Jesus is the only way, and yet we don't know anything about the 3 different ways that Hindu people, they don't maybe use this term salvation, but they have something of meaning of relating with God, the universal. And so if we know nothing about their deep sense of devotion or their profound sense of knowledge, how do we know for sure that Jesus is the only way? I've worked with that text, and I'm not going to give you my age on that, though I could. But I really think we as Christians need to seriously think, why is it that others are doubtful about us, if they are? Or what is it about the idea of suggesting that difference is good? Is religious difference good? Might God have planned for difference to begin with? If so, how are we intentional out from others. And admittedly, like Bonnie said, there are a few different religions here in Goshen. The Southland Women's Group actually started at the time of COVID, and it was initially the Muslims and Christians who decided they wanted to get together and genuinely find common purposes and interests and speakers. And then before long, they had Jewish people join them. So they've continued to meet every month, and they rotate among the three groups, and that would be quite different from our group. Admittedly, our group is still more learning. And I think Bonnie's comment about, I think we're in a phase right now among some of our Mennonite churches here of genuinely trying to find out more about North American indigenous people. And I think that's very valid. I must admit, talked with the Rosie down at the Indian restaurant, and she's going to be joining us in January. You don't even know this yet, to talk about Sikhism. How many of you really know the depth of Sikh concern and interest in their scripture? I have a very good Sikh friend over in South Bend, Mishawaka, and I'm sure he spends more time with his text than I do with the Bible. I'm not just interested in comparing, but I do think that he motivates me. So my conversing with him, he knows that I'm going to be a Christian all my life. I know that he will be Sikh, and that's wonderful. I mean, that's something of how we relate. What else do you want?
Yeah. 12:30? No,
20 till 12.
yeah. If there are any questions, we'd be glad to. Oh, comments, yes.
Here comes John.
You like to run around? Can I hand this to?
We lived near Asheville, North Carolina for 16 years. And a friend of mine introduced me to a Jewish discussion group at a synagogue in Asheville. And I spent many years meeting with them as a Christian. There were a couple of other Christians, one Methodist, one Lutheran, I think. But we discussed Jewish books about the Holocaust. We had one really good book about the whole history of Israel from the time of the beginning of the 19th century up until the present. But we also did some biblical studies, both Old Testament and New. We studied the book of John and the book of Romans. And the Jewish people were aghast at John's comments about the Jews, which I tried to help them see was basically criticizing the Jewish leaders rather than the Jewish people as a whole. And then in Romans, of course, Paul, as a Jewish rabbi who became a Jesus follower and promoter, in chapter 11 talks about, what about the Jews? The Gentiles have been grafted into the Jewish tree, and he looks forward to the time when all will be one. So those were interesting years of discussion. During COVID, we did it by Zoom. But I had some really good relationships with those folks.
Thanks for, that's that kind of testimony that I think most people can give who have had the opportunity to genuinely converse. I would only say about the John, I think, can we be open to the fact that there are 70 statements of the Jews in the Gospel of John? Do you think you're influenced by 70 statements, some of which were negating Jesus?
One of the things that I think our generation was very much conditioned to was to be very discriminatory against the Jewish people. Something that I could never understand to this day. And as a case in point, relating as a second grader, I attended college church Sunday school, and there was a story about a little boy who came to school, and there was a new boy, and a bunch of kids around him were taunting him for being Jewish. And he decided, this isn't right, I'm going to be your friend. And my first reaction to that story was that, well, if there were a Jewish kid that came to my school, that I would try to be his friend. What I didn't know was that I already had a Jewish classmate in second grade at Parkside School.
Is there much in their scriptures about peace and nonviolence?
And why do you raise that?
Because it's one of our strong traditions as Mennonites, especially for
Sure.
me.
So this should not be any complication as far as putting into practice genuine interest in the other. I don't mean to sound too negative. I suppose some of you have experienced me as that. I think I have to say that I care so much about who we are as Mennonites and Christians that I just long for the fact of our openness to those who are different and what we can learn from them. I mean, my Sikh friend, his sense of the scripture is just amazing. Our Muslim friends, I have things to learn about prayer. That's no negation on my family or my church, but I think the whole idea of relating to people for whom that really has been core for much of their experience is prayer.
Mhm.
What else what would you like to tell us? That might be a question to ask. Or what would you wish, or what would you say you would like to be a part of this group if we did X or Y or Z? What would X, Y, and Z be?
Bill.
I don't really know how many religious minorities there would be in Goshen. I know of at least 2 Muslim families, and there probably are more. I suspect there might even be more Jewish people. I just wondered, to what extent have you tried to involve local people in your discussions?
When we have personal connections, we invite them. But you know, we need help in making those connections. And we also need help in getting out the announcements of what we're trying to do.
I've known Bill about your and Phyllis's connection, especially with one family, and I brought the man of that family to a meeting at Greencroft, and I had a little conversation with him. We also sent one of our group over to where's the place where there's a Muslim mosque over Topeka. And we were told that there would be very few men, husbands, who would want their wife to come to talk to our group. So again, that's a social issue between the sexes within a religious group. But I'd welcome your connecting and finding out, for example, if the husband and wife could come to our group. The woman who we had who was Muslim was a next door neighbor to another woman who came to our group over in Elkhart, and she did come multiple times. I think she was very interesting in her responses to questions too.
Well, thank you, friends, for introducing us to your inquiry group. Religious inquiry is Interfaith Inquiry group that meets monthly, November.
Every other month on the last Thursday of the month, except that this month there's Thanksgiving. So we're meeting a week early, but at 10:30 at the public library.
Basement, auditorium,
Yeah.
accessible by elevator.
So the only way to keep track of such a schedule is to hopefully get that email that comes out every Sunday morning. My son puts it together, The Good of Goshen, and it has a list of these kinds of happenings.
I would also say that I have a list of those who have attended our group who have intentionally given us their email. And so I often send out some kind of a handout in between meetings, and certainly anybody who would have interest, we would welcome knowing your email.
Okay. Again, thank you so much.